Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. What would you do if an HOA Karen called the police when you opened your garage and she claimed that you stole her car? This is exactly what happened to OP, so let's find out what happened. So I've lived in this neighborhood for about 10 years now, and honestly it was mostly peaceful when I first moved in. A good mix of folks, everyone minded their own business for the most part, but of course every paradise has something wrong with it, and mine came in the form of an entitled nightmare across the street, our HOA self-appointed enforcer, aka Karen. Let me paint you a picture of just how relentless this woman has been over the years. It started small, like most things do. About 8 years ago, I got my first taste of Karen's neighborhood watch activities when she knocked on my door at 7 AM on a Saturday to inform me that my newspaper was creating an unsightly appearance because it had blown onto the edge of my driveway instead of sitting neatly by my front door. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. The incidents escalated from there. The first time she called the cops on me was over my grass height. I'd been out of town for work for a week and a half, and we had unusual amounts of rain. When I got back, my lawn was maybe an inch taller than the HOA guidelines allowed, and I was planning to mow that weekend. But Karen beat me to it by calling code enforcement and the police for a property maintenance violation. The officer who showed up actually apologized and said they had to respond to all calls, but told me privately that a lot of neighbors had been getting similar complaints from the same source. And then there was the great parking incident of 3 years ago. My buddy Mike came over to watch the playoffs, and his F-150 was about 6 inches longer than my driveway. The back of his truck barely hung over onto the street. We are talking maybe 2 feet of overhang on a white residential street where parking is completely legal. Mike had been there for exactly 47 minutes when Karen called the police to report a so-called illegally parked commercial vehicle blocking the traffic. The responding officer took one look at the situation and confirmed it was legal street parking and then left. But not before Karen spent 10 minutes arguing with him about property values and commercial vehicles in residential areas. Mike's truck had carpet cleaning equipment in the bed because he ran a side business, but it was his personal vehicle. The leaf blower incident happened last fall. I was doing yard work on a Saturday at 2 PM, well within the allowed noise ordinance hours, and Karen called to report excessive noise disturbance and claimed I was violating quiet hours. When the cops arrived, I was literally finishing up putting the leaf blower away. The officer looked confused and asked what the emergency was, and Karen insisted that power tools were not allowed on weekends. The cop had to explain to her that leaf blowers at 2 PM on Saturday were perfectly legal, and again reminded her about appropriate use of emergency services. But the most ridiculous incident before the whole Corvette situation happened 6 months ago during our neighborhood's annual block party. The HOA organizes it every year, and it's usually pretty fun. Families bring food, kids play in the street, that sort of thing. I brought my famous barbecue ribs and set up my smoker in my front yard, which everyone loved. Karen, however, had appointed herself the so-called block party coordinator, despite not actually being in charge of anything. She spent the entire day marching around with a clipboard, telling people where they could and could not set up, moving people's chairs, and generally making everyone uncomfortable. The breaking point came when she decided my smoker was a fire hazard and demanded I move it. I politely explained that it was in my own yard, well away from any structures, and I'd been barbecuing for the block party for 5 years without incident, and Karen did not like that answer. She stormed off and, I kid you not, called the fire department to report an illegal outdoor fire in a residential area. 20 minutes later, a full fire truck rolled up to our block party. The firefighters got out, looked around confused, and asked where the emergency was. Karen proudly pointed to my smoker and started explaining about open flame violations and neighborhood safety. The fire captain, a guy who clearly dealt with this type of call before, walked over to my smoker and looked at it for about 10 seconds and declared it perfectly safe and legal. He then turned to Karen and gave her a stern lecture about wasting emergency resources. The entire neighborhood was watching at this point, and you could see people starting to really turn against her. Kids were staring, neighbors were whispering, and Karen just stood there doubling down on her position that she was protecting everyone. That's when I realized Karen was not just annoying, she was becoming a legitimate problem. The fire captain actually said to me quietly that they'd been getting a lot of calls from this address, aka her, and they were starting to document them in case they needed to take action about false reports. After that block party incident, most of the neighborhood started actively avoiding Karen. People would see her coming and suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. But that just seemed to make her more determined to find problems and assert her imaginary authority. Now, here's where my car comes into the story. I happen to own a vehicle that's been in my family for generations, a 1967 Chevy Corvette. It's not just some random old car, it was my grandfather's, bought new in the 60s and passed down to me after he passed away. I have all the paperwork to prove it, from the original bill of sale to stacks of maintenance records and even photographs of him standing proudly next to it back when he was my age. This car is my pride and joy, and I take better care of it than I do my lawn, which around here is a real brag. It barely leaves the garage except for car shows or perfect weather Sunday cruises. However, I sometimes do like to keep my garage door open to show it off and look at it because it's so beautiful. But to Karen, it was clearly not a cherished family heirloom. Nope, it was dollar signs. I had noticed her eyeing it whenever I had the garage open, making comments about classic car values and asking intrusive questions about what it was worth. She had even suggested a few times that I should sell it because it's just sitting there and someone who actually drives it should own it. And one morning in early summer, she got it in her head that it was supposed to be hers. So one random Tuesday morning, I'm minding my own business, getting ready to head out to work. I open my garage door to get my daily driver, and Karen just seems to pop up out of nowhere. Later I realized she'd been waiting and watching for me to open the garage. Karen was out on her morning patrol of the neighborhood. Seriously, this woman had nothing better to do than pace up and down the street with a cup of coffee like she is private security. The second she spotted the Corvette, she froze. I saw her eyes light up with recognition and something else. Excitement, maybe even greed. The next thing I know, she's storming across my driveway, pointing her finger like she's about to make a citizen's arrest. She starts yelling, "That's my car!" I thought she had finally lost her mind completely. I just stood there blinking at her until she clarified. According to her, she had bought a 1967 Chevy Corvette from a vintage car dealer a few weeks ago and was supposed to pick it up that week. Her words, she said it was red, restored condition, very rare, and that I needed to explain why her car was sitting in my garage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. First of all, I've had this Corvette for years. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that. And second, she clearly didn't know what she actually had bought. I knew a local dealer had been advertising some project cars recently, and apparently Karen had invested in one. What I figured out later was that she had bought herself a rough project car that needed serious restoration work, but somehow convinced herself that my well-maintained family heirloom was the same vehicle. Since both cars were red 67 Corvettes and she had only seen mine from across the street before, she must have assumed that they were the same car. The fact that in her mind there could only be one red 1967 Corvette in our area and it must be hers was just wild. It was like she had worked herself into some fantasy where she had already taken possession of my car. Before I could even respond or laugh at the absurdity, she whipped out her phone and dialed 911 right there in my driveway, reporting a theft in progress. She was literally standing on my property pointing at my car in my garage, telling a 911 operator that I'd stolen her vehicle. That was the moment I knew this was gonna get really messy. I knew that leaving would look terrible, so I was forced to call in sick to work and wait for the cops to arrive. When they got there, the officers asked me to wait while they sorted out the situation and requested to see my documentation, which I was more than happy to provide. I offered to show them all my documents, registration, insurance, the original title transfer from my grandfather, maintenance records going back decades. This helped calm things down a bit despite Karen already showing pictures of her paperwork into their faces, claiming it proved she owned the car. The cops were not about to let it drop without a thorough investigation. One officer looked through my documents carefully, did a complete walk around the car and asked me to point out the VIN number, which I was more than happy to do. I even showed them where to find the hidden VIN locations that classic car owners know about. Officer, so ma'am, when exactly did you purchase this Corvette? Karen straightened up defensively, clearly feeling vindicated that the police were taking her seriously. Karen, a few weeks ago, they promised me a fully restored 67 Corvette, excellent condition, and now it's here in his garage instead of where it's supposed to be. She pointed at me like I was some kind of master thief. The officer called the dealer directly using the number on Karen's paperwork, and that's when the truth started coming out. After a conversation that I could only hear one side of, it became crystal crystal clear. Karen had indeed purchased a 1967 Corvette from that dealer, but not the pristine one perfectly maintained car that I owned. What she had bought was a project car that needed significant restoration work. Faded paint, cracked interior, mechanical issues, non-running engine, the works. The dealer confirmed the VIN for her car over the phone, and it didn't match mine, not even close. The officer looked up from his notepad and the paperwork. "Officer, ma'am, the vehicle you purchased is still at their lot awaiting pickup. According to the dealer, it needs extensive restoration work, but it's yours. This car here belongs to him and has been registered in his name for over a decade." Karen looked frustrated and kept insisting she was right, but you could see the doubt starting to creep in as reality hit. "Karen, that's not possible." They told me it was in great condition, and look, there it is. The cop explained again about the VIN numbers and that I had comprehensive proof the car was registered in my name for years. There was no way it could have been her car. They also told her she needed to lower her voice since she was getting loud again. I could barely contain my disbelief at that point. Karen had somehow convinced herself that she could claim my grandfather's Corvette instead of picking up the project car she had actually purchased. It was like she thought she could just declare ownership of it and make it reality. The officers clearly were not impressed with her claims. After they finished checking my paperwork, it was obvious that I was the rightful owner. I had every document going back years, while Karen had nothing but a sales slip for a completely different car with a different VIN. The police explained to her that the car she bought from the dealer needed restoration work, unlike my well-maintained 1967 Corvette, and they told her she had not been tricked. The paperwork clearly described what she was buying, and at that point it became clear this was just another one of Karen's attempts to cause trouble, but this time she had gone way too far. The cops warned her that making false reports and wasting their time could get her into serious legal trouble. They told her that if she tried something like this again, she could be facing charges for filing false police reports. Meanwhile, I was standing there with several neighbors watching from their yards, and Karen was being corrected by law enforcement in front of everyone. Instead of looking embarrassed or apologetic though, she kept arguing. She insisted my car should be hers even after the officers explained everything multiple times, but by then, the neighbors were openly shaking their heads and looking disgusted. People already knew she was a troublemaker from all her previous antics, but this situation made her look completely unhinged. When the officers finally wrapped things up, they told me I was free to go about my day and that Karen had absolutely no claim over my car whatsoever. They also made it clear that her frequent 911 calls were not doing her any favors and that they were documenting this incident. The truth had spoken for itself, and Karen's pattern of behavior was finally catching up with her. Over the next few days, the situation became even more embarrassing for Karen. Word gradually got around that the vintage car dealer she bought her dream car from had confirmed everything. So apparently Karen went back to the dealership after the cops' incident, demanding answers about how she had been misled. She wanted to know why she didn't have a pristine 1967 Corvette like the one across the street. The dealer calmly pulled out her paperwork and showed her the car she had actually agreed to buy, a restoration project that looked nothing like mine in its current condition. Karen had apparently been telling people around the neighborhood about her new Corvette before even seeing it, and now could not explain the discrepancy. A couple of my neighbors happened to be at the dealership around that time and overheard parts of her heated conversation with the staff. From what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, she eventually did pick up her car, but was furious about the condition and tried unsuccessfully to get her money back. After that, Karen's credibility in the neighborhood completely tanked. People who once tolerated her complaints now questioned everything she said. She went from being the vocal HOA member who thought she had authority to someone people actively avoided and rolled their eyes at. The combination of the fire department incident, the police incident with my car, and her general pattern of behavior had finally worn everyone down. For me, it was satisfying without having to do anything dramatic. I did not need to sue her or take any legal action. All I had to do was show my documents and let Karen's own assumption and lies do the rest. Watching her lose all credibility while everyone realized I'd been the reasonable one all along was better than any formal complaint I could have filed. After the whole incident had settled down a bit, I did make a point of being more visible with the Corvette around the neighborhood. I would wash it in the driveway on weekends and took it to a couple local car shows that summer, not to rub it in exactly, but to remind everyone what the real story was. Karen stopped approaching me altogether after that and seemed to avoid coming outside when I was working on the car. She had damaged her own reputation, lost face with the neighbors, and I came out with my car and credibility intact. Sometimes the best response to someone's false accusations is just letting the truth speak for itself. The neighborhood is much more peaceful now, and Karen has learned to keep her mouth shut about other people's property. And the next one is a super satisfying revenge story that is titled "Block the Street?" I will just leave my car there. And by the way, if you enjoy my crazy Karen stories, please don't forget to like the video and leave me a comment if you want to support me. Thank you so much. So I went to visit my parents last week and saw their neighbor's old car parked there, which reminded me of the one and only interaction I had with him about 20 or 21 years ago. The neighbor had, still has, I just saw it last week, a very old car in somewhat decent shape. And I'm sure it holds sentimental value for him, but it's not a fancy or rare model, just old, maybe late 70s or early 80s. At the time, my wife and I had just married and we were saving money by living in an apartment that belongs to my parents right next to their house. Both my wife and I, each of us had our own cars, and on that Saturday I needed to take mine to the shop for something simple, an oil change or something similar, I don't remember exactly what. We planned to drop my car and then go have breakfast nearby, so I drove my car and my wife followed me in hers. As I was driving down the main avenue, I hit some traffic, so I turned onto a parallel, narrower, one-way street. That is when I came across this idiot going the wrong way and blocking the entire road. In front of him was another car facing the correct direction, unable to pass. The driver of that car honked and yelled, but the jerk refused to move. After a while, the frustrated driver gave up, backed out, cursed at him, and left. I pulled up in front of him and honked too, but of course he didn't budge. Instead, he started tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, clearly showing he had no intention of moving. Then I looked in my rearview mirror and saw my wife waiting behind me. That is when I got an idea. I shut down my engine, exited my car, locked it, and yelled to the guy something like "good luck" or "F you", I don't remember. I hopped in my wife's car and told her to back up. She was confused at first, but quickly caught on, put it in reverse, and we drove back to the main street, leaving him stuck there. The look on his face was priceless. We drove one block down, then looped around from the other end, technically also going the wrong way, to see what he was doing, and sure enough, he was struggling to maneuver his car around mine. The only way he could get out was by reversing and making a U-turn. As he was doing this, he spotted us parked nearby, watching and laughing. His jaw dropped. I threw in a snarky remark, got back into my car and drove off, this time in the correct direction. A few weeks later, I was driving in the area and I saw him with the flashers on and the hood up. I drove a pretty common car and slowed down as I got near him. He approached me, and when I was very close, he finally recognized me. I gave him the finger and sped away. Last week, I saw he still has that same piece of junk parked outside his house. I can only hope it has stranded him many more times over the years. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. They killed my pets. So, to keep it simple, yesterday I got a Siamese fighting fish, or known as a betta fish, named Eclipse, due to obvious reasons. I unfortunately did not have a proper aquarium for it. So I made one out of a large storage container from Home Depot, plastic, a coffee mug, sponge filter plus air pump, and a little bit of sand. It wasn't perfect, but it would do until then. So my aunt complains earlier this morning that, "Boy, you got that big ass container for this small ass fish. And it don't need all that crap." For those who don't know, betta fish need at least a 5-gallon tank, so I tried explaining to her that this is not one of those carnival goldfish and it needs certain criteria to thrive. And that, well, it didn't work. Anyway, I leave off of school, I get a call from my girlfriend, damn I love her, that I can have her old 30-gallon aquarium plus filter and heater. I then leave 2 hours early from school to put Eclipse in his new home, only to find that she took upon herself to dismantle my makeshift fish tank piece by piece, leaving Eclipse dead in a Tupperware bowl filled with freezing cold water in the middle of my bedroom. When I confronted her, she said, "I told you, they don't need all that crap, and that's what fish do. They swim and die." So once she left to run errands, I went into the living room and grabbed her picture of her deceased grandfather, the only thing she has left related to him, and I dismantled the frame bit by bit. And when she comes back home, where's she gonna find the picture? At the bottom of the bowl, torn into shreds in freezing cold water in the middle of her bedroom floor. Sure, it might be a fish, but it was my fish, my money, my joy, literally murdered in cold blood. Welp, tonight she's gonna learn just how little things can make a big difference. Swim in peace, Eclipse, who lasted as long as her name's sake. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm curious, what do you think about this story? Do you think OP went too far in teaching this person a lesson, or was it just right? Let me know in the comments. And the next one is a super interesting petty revenge story, and it is titled Car Snob Gets to Hear the Ugly Truth. So this is not me, but my dad. My dad is a huge Volkswagen fan, absolutely loves the things, and at the time of this story, about 1987, he drove a Rabbit that, since he's perpetually broke, was mostly rust and duct tape. He and my mom are going to visit my mom's sister and her first husband, both of whom are fairly well-to-do compared to my parents being dirt-poor rednecks. My dad's brother-in-law had bought a brand new Audi, and my dad parked his Rot Rocket next to it. Brother-in-law comes out and starts bragging about his new Audi, and while my dad would have shrugged this off, he then goes on to bash Volkswagen in general, and my dad's Rabbit in particular, with both of their wives watching. For those of you who don't know, Volkswagen owns Audi and has owned Audi since the 1960s. Naturally, since brother-in-law is being a dick, my dad asks him, well, if Volkswagen are so terrible, why did you buy one? When brother-in-law starts to protest, my dad points to a sticker on the window, which had the Volkswagen emblem beside the Audi emblem. He then goes around the car pointing out all the Volkswagen stickers and even pops the hood and starts pointing to all the Volkswagen badges on the various engine components, while his brother-in-law gets increasingly flustered again while both of their wives are watching. Finally, my dad said something basically to the effect of, we both drive Volkswagens. You just paid a lot more for yours than I did. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, please don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you again tomorrow.